My husband thought he broke me. He was wrong.
Texas oil rancher's wife stranded with 3 horses. My husband thought he broke me. ... He was wrong. The acrid stench of West Texas crude mixed with aged bourbon permeated the master suite of our sprawling ranch estate, a toxic cologne that had become Thaddeus Blackwood's signature scent. I stood barefoot on the cold pecan hardwood, my trembling hands clutching the damning evidence of my husband's ultimate betrayal. The bank statements swam before my eyes like venomous serpents, each transaction a calculated strike designed to destroy me. Every cent from our accounts, the investment portfolios, even the emergency funds hidden away for our son's college. Education had vanished into offshore accounts bearing names of shell companies I'd never heard of. My name is Cordelia Blackwood, though I was born Cordelia Reyes, daughter of migrant workers who taught me that honor meant more than money. For 15 years, I had been Mrs. Thaddeus Blackwood, wife of one of Texas's most ruthless oil barons. I had transformed myself from a veterinarian's assistant into the perfect trophy wife, learning to navigate charity galas and boardroom dinners with the same skill I once used to gentle frightened horses. But beneath the designer gowns and practiced smiles, I had never forgotten who I truly was. The metallic taste of dread filled my mouth as I heard Thaddeus's custom Bentley purring in the driveway below. He had left just hours ago with a casual kiss on my forehead, promising to return from his Houston meeting by dawn. That kiss now burned like acid on my skin. Through the window, I watched him emerge from the car, his tall frame moving with the predatory grace of a man who had just executed a perfect kill. He didn't know I had discovered his betrayal yet. He didn't know that our accountant, Malcolm Reeves, had called me in a panic after noticing the massive transfers. I found Thaddeus in his mahogany-paneled study, feet propped on his desk, a crystal tumbler of Macallan in one hand and a Cuban cigar in the other. The amber light from his Tiffany lamp cast shadows across his angular face, turning his aristocratic features into something demonic. His ice-blue eyes, which had once looked at me with what I'd believed was love, now held the cold calculation of a viper assessing its prey. "Thaddeus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what have you done?" He took a long drag from his cigar, exhaling slowly before his lips curved into a smile that chilled me to my bones. "Ah, Cordelia, earlier than expected. Malcolm called you, I assume. I'll have to deal with this breach of confidentiality. You stole everything. Our entire life savings, Augustus's college fund." My voice cracked on our son's name. Augustus, my brilliant, sensitive 13-year-old, who played violin and wrote poetry, who looked at his father with hero worship I now knew was tragically misplaced. Stole. Thaddeus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My dear, simple Cordelia, one cannot steal what already belongs to him. Every dollar in those accounts came from my oil fields, my investments, my family's empire. You were merely a temporary beneficiary. I helped build this empire." The words tore from my throat. "I entertained your investors, managed your households, raised your son while you spent months on drilling platforms. I gave up my career, my identity, everything for this family." He set down his glass with deliberate precision. "Your career? You mean cleaning horse stalls and administering vaccines to barn cats?" His voice dripped contempt. "Cordelia, you were nothing when I found you. A pretty face with rough hands and big dreams. I polished you, educated you, gave you a life you could never have imagined. And now that contract has expired. Where's Augustus? The question came out as a desperate plea. His smile widened. Already on a plane to Switzerland. The Rousseau Academy will complete his education properly, away from your provincial influence. He didn't even question it when I told him it. Was a surprise advancement opportunity. So trusting, our boy. The room spun. My son, my heart, ripped away without even a goodbye. You can't just take him. I'm his father. I control the purse strings. I have the best lawyers money can buy. He stood, his 6'4" frame towering over me. What do you have, Cordelia? A expired work visa from 20 years ago. No money, no connections. He pulled out a manila envelope, thick with papers. Divorce papers, already filed. You'll find the terms quite generous, considering you get to keep your 3 horses. Those nags you insisted on rescuing, what were their names again? Tempest, Phoenix, and ... Midnight. My rescued horses, 3 souls I'd saved from slaughter, nursed back to health, loved with every fiber of my being. Tempest, my grey Arabian mare with trust issues that mirrored my own. Phoenix, the chestnut thoroughbred who'd survived a barn fire. Midnight, the black Mustang who'd been deemed unbreakable until he met me. You have 24 hours to vacate. The property, Thaddeus continued, returning to his desk. The new owners take possession tomorrow afternoon. Oh, and Cordelia, you'll find your car keys no longer work. Credit cards cancelled. Phone service terminated as of he checked his Rolex 10 minutes ago. But don't worry, I've left you something. He tossed a small leather pouch on the desk. It landed with a pathetic clink. $500, cash, should be enough to get you started on your new adventure. The ranch's eastern gate will remain unlocked until noon tomorrow. I suggest you make use of it, Thaddeus, please. This is insane. What about everything we built together? What about the promises you made? He leaned back, studying me like an entomologist examining a pinned butterfly. Promises, oh Cordelia, still so naive. This was always the plan. You see, I needed a wife to secure certain ... acquisitions. Family men are trusted more in Texas oil. You played your part beautifully. But now I'm expanding internationally, and a Mexican-American wife with working-class roots doesn't fit the image anymore. Lady Pemberton's daughter, Vivian, is much more suitable for my European ventures. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Every moment, every tender word, every promise had been calculated. I was a prop in his grand production, and now the show was over. The horses, I managed. At least let me take supplies for them. Feed, medical supplies, transport, ... Whatever you can carry, he said dismissively, though I wouldn't dawdle. My security team has been instructed to ensure your prompt departure. And Cordelia, don't attempt to contact Augustus. It will only confuse the boy. He's better off making a clean break. I fled the study, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor as I ran to the stables. My horses sensed my distress immediately. Tempest nickered softly, pressing her velvet nose into my palm. Phoenix stamped nervously, his scarred legs trembling. Midnight stood sentinel, his dark eyes reflecting my anguish. I buried my face in Tempest's mane and sobbed until my throat was raw. Dawn came too quickly. With shaking hands, I gathered what I could: worn saddlebags, a frayed lead rope, an ancient canvas tarp, a few basic tools, half a bag of grain, and a dented water bucket. I found my grandmother's silver locket in my jewelry box. the one piece Thaddeus had deemed too worthless to pawn. Inside was a faded photo of Augustus as a baby, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. It was all I had left of my son. I dressed in my oldest clothes, faded jeans, worn boots, a flannel shirt that had survived from my veterinary assistant days. In the growing light, I led my 3 horses out of their comfortable stalls for the last time. The ranch sprawled before us, 5,000 acres of prime Texas land. But Thaddeus had been specific about which gate I could use. The eastern gate that led to the property's most desolate corner, where the land turned harsh and unforgiving, miles from any road or town. He had planned this meticulously, not just to divorce me, but to destroy me, to leave me in the wasteland where he believed I would either crawl back, begging, or simply disappear. As I led my horses through that gate, listening to it clang shut behind us with electronic finality, I made a vow. I would survive, I would thrive, and someday, somehow, I would see my son again. The morning sun rose like a furnace, baking the barren landscape that stretched endlessly before us. Thaddeus hadn't just abandoned me, he had orchestrated my exile to the most forsaken corner of Texas, a place where the land itself seemed hostile to life. The nearest town was 40 miles away, across terrain that would challenge even seasoned riders. With 3 horses and barely enough water for a day, it was a death sentence disguised as mercy. That first day nearly broke me. The October heat was unseasonable, climbing past 90 degrees before noon. My horses, accustomed to automatic waterers and shaded paddocks, struggled with the harsh conditions. Tempest's grey coat darkened with sweat. Phoenix, still bearing the respiratory scars from his fire trauma, wheezed with each breath. Midnight, ever protective, kept positioning himself between us and the blazing sun, as if his black coat could somehow shield us. I rationed the water carefully, giving most to the horses. My lips cracked, my skin burned. My designer boots, the only shoes I'd been able to grab, raised blisters with each step. We followed a barely visible trail that wound through thorny mesquite and towering clusters of prickly pear cactus. Rattlesnakes sunned themselves on rocky outcroppings, their warnings echoing across the desert silence. By late afternoon, dehydration made me dizzy. The landscape wavered like a mirage, and I began to hallucinate. I saw Augustus calling for me. I saw my grandmother, dead these 20 years, beckoning me forward. I saw Thaddeus laughing from the comfort of his air-conditioned office. It was Tempest who saved me, refusing to move when I tried, to lead us off a hidden cliff edge. Her stubbornness, once a training challenge, now kept us alive. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. The desert that had tried to cook us alive now threatened to freeze us. I huddled with my horses. Beneath the inadequate tarp, their body heat my only source of warmth. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries answered by sounds I couldn't identify. I clutched the pitchfork I'd managed to bring, knowing it was poor protection against the dangers lurking in the darkness. Sleep came in fragments haunted by nightmares. I dreamed of Augustus crying for me, trapped behind walls of Swiss marble. I dreamed of Thaddeus signing papers that erased my existence. I dreamed of my horses falling one by one until I was alone in an endless wasteland. Each time I awoke, I counted their breathing, reassuring myself they still lived. The second day brought new challenges. Phoenix developed colic, his scarred lungs struggling with the dust and stress. I had no medications, no way to help him except walk him endlessly, praying the movement would ease his pain. Tempest found a small seep of brackish water beneath some rocks, barely enough to wet our throats. Midnight, magnificent even in extremity, stood guard while I collapsed from exhaustion. On the third day, delirious and defeated, I spotted it, a structure rising from the desert like a broken tooth. As we drew closer, I realized it was an old line shack, a remnant from the early ranching days when cowboys needed shelter while working remote pastures. The building looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The roof sagged, the walls leaned at precarious angles, windows were either broken or boarded over. The door hung by a single hinge. Inside was worse. Dust covered everything in thick layers, rodent droppings littered the floor. The smell of decay permeated every corner. A rusted wood stove squatted in one corner, its chimney pipe disconnected and lying on the floor. The kitchen area consisted of a dry sink and shelves hanging by threads. In what might have been a bedroom, an iron bed frame held the remnants of a mattress that mice had colonized generations ago. But there was also unexpected treasure. In a wooden crate beneath cobwebs, I found journals. Dozens of them, leather-bound and filled with elegant handwriting. They belonged to Esperanza Delacroix, dated from 1876 to 1891. Esperanza had been a mail-order bride from New Orleans who found herself abandoned in this very shack when her husband died of snakebite 3 weeks after their wedding. Instead of returning east, she had stayed, building a life from nothing. Her journals became my Bible. Esperanza documented everything: how to find water by following game trails, which plants were edible, how to doctor horses with desert remedies, how to repair adobe walls, how to survive when the world wanted you dead. She wrote of loneliness, so profound it became a physical ache, of small victories that felt like miracles, of the peculiar freedom that comes from having nothing left to lose. One entry particularly resonated: "The land does not care that I was raised in silk and taught. To play Mozart, it demands truth. It strips away pretense until only the essential remains. I find that what remains of me is stronger than I ever imagined." The desert is a harsh teacher, but an honest one. Using Esperanza's instructions, I began the painstaking work of survival. The first challenge was water. An old windmill stood 50 yards from the shack, its blades seized with rust. Esperanza had sketched detailed repair instructions. With my few tools and countless hours of effort, I cleaned, oiled, and adjusted the mechanism. My hands bled. My muscles screamed. But on the 7th day, the blades caught the wind and groaned to life. Water, brown and rusty at first, then clearing, poured from the spout. I fell to my knees and wept. Shelter came next. The shack was barely standing, but Esperanza had written about adobe repairs. I found a deposit of suitable clay near a dry creek bed. Mixing it with straw and water, I began patching walls. The work was brutal. Each brick had to be formed, dried, and carefully placed. The desert sun that had been my enemy became my ally. Curing the adobe quickly, slowly, wall by wall, I rebuilt the structure. Food presented the greatest challenge. My horses could graze on sparse desert grass, but I needed more. Esperanza's journals identified edible plants, prickly pear pads and fruits, mesquite beans, wild onions, and desert marigold. The taste was often bitter, the nutrition minimal, but it kept me alive. I learned to set simple snares for rabbits, though success was rare. Once I found a rattlesnake sunning itself near the water tank. Desperation overcame fear. Following Esperanza's instructions, I killed it with a long stick and ate my first meat in weeks. The transformation wasn't just physical. As days turned, 2 weeks, something fundamental shifted within me. The soft woman who had worn designer gowns and hosted charity galas was dying. And in her place, someone harder and more real was being born. I found myself talking to Esperanza as if she were present, sharing my small victories and large defeats with a woman dead for over a century. Today I patch the roof, I would say to the empty air. Tomorrow I'll start on the corral fence. My horses adapted to. Tempest's nervous energy channeled into vigilance, alerting me to approaching storms or predators. Phoenix's breathing improved in the dry air, his coat regaining some shine. Midnight became my partner in ways I'd never imagined, allowing me to ride him bareback to scout for resources, his sure feet navigating terrain that would have terrified me months ago. One morning, I caught my reflection in a piece of broken mirror. The woman staring back was unrecognizable. Skin darkened by sun, hair bleached and wild, muscles defined by endless labor. But the eyes, those were different too. Gone was the uncertainty, the need for approval. These eyes belonged to someone who had faced death and chosen life, who had been stripped of everything and discovered she was enough. That's when I found Esperanza's final journal, hidden behind loose boards in the wall. The entries were different, urgent. She wrote of a hidden valley, 2 days' ride north, where a natural spring created an oasis. She had discovered it while tracking wild horses and spent her last years developing it into a secret paradise. The directions were precise, marked by landmarks that time wouldn't change. But there was more. Esperanza had discovered something else in that valley, something that had made her wealthy enough to leave detailed instructions for a trust to be established. Though she had chosen to live simply until her death, she called it the blessing. Beneath the stone, and wrote that it would wait for another woman who understood that true wealth cannot be stolen. I studied those directions until I memorized every detail. This shack had saved my life, but it wasn't living. If Esperanza's valley existed, it might offer not just survival, but the chance to build something more. The risk was enormous. 2 days through unknown desert with limited water. If the valley didn't exist, or if I couldn't find it, we would die. But staying meant slow starvation. And something in Esperanza's words called to me. She had been abandoned too, left to die by circumstances beyond her control. Yet she had not just survived, but discovered something transformative. Perhaps that was the gift one abandoned woman could give another across the centuries. I prepared. Carefully, following Esperanza's advice, I crafted larger water containers from salvaged materials. I dried what little meat I had managed to obtain. I reinforced my makeshift tack and saddlebags. Most importantly, I studied the stars, learning to navigate as Esperanza had taught through her journals. The morning we left, I stood in the doorway of the shack that had been my salvation. "Thank you," I whispered to Esperanza's ghost. Then I mounted Midnight, with Tempest and Phoenix following, and rode north into the unknown. The journey to Esperanza's valley tested every skill I'd learned. The landmarks she described were subtle. A rock formation like a sleeping giant, a grove of ancient cottonwoods marking an underground stream, a canyon where pictographs told stories of those who came before. Navigation required constant vigilance. The desert tried to confuse, to turn me in circles, but Esperanza's instructions proved true. On the second day, exhausted and down to our last water, I spotted it. A narrow crack in a limestone cliff, barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. Beyond lay a hidden canyon, and the sight that greeted me stole what little breath I had left. Green, impossible, lush green. A spring bubbled from the rock face, feeding a pool that supported cottonwoods, willows, and grass that grew stirrup high. My horses whinnied and surged forward, and I let them run, tears streaming down my face. But the true miracle lay deeper in the valley. Following Esperanza's final instructions, I found a small cave behind the waterfall. Inside, stacked neatly, and covered in oilcloth, were supplies she had cached, tools, seeds, books, and a leather portfolio containing legal documents, the trust she had established, the land rights she had secured, all waiting, as she had written, for the next woman who would understand. The blessing beneath the stone revealed itself when I moved a carefully placed rock. Behind it lay a vein of silver, ore, not massive, but substantial enough. Esperanza had found it, recorded it, but never fully mined it. Her note explained, "Wealth too easily gained corrupts. Take only what you need to build. The earth will provide for those who respect her gifts." That valley became my true beginning. Using Esperanza's tools and seeds, I planted my first real garden. The horses thrived on the abundant grass. I built a proper shelter, learning from both Esperanza's journals and my own mistakes. Slowly, carefully, I extracted small amounts of silver, just enough to purchase essential supplies from the distant town. But I didn't go to town myself, not at first. Instead, I found an unlikely ally in Joaquin Morales, a traveling trader who supplied remote ranches. He discovered me by accident, following smoke from my campfire. A man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a lined face that spoke of his own struggles. He recognized something in me, perhaps the same desperation he'd once faced as an immigrant trying to build a life in an unwelcoming land. Joaquin became my connection to the world. He brought supplies, news, and eventually a proposition. His nephew Mateo was a lawyer in San Antonio, specializing in land rights and mineral claims. With Esperanza's documents and my small silver finds, there might be a way to establish legal ownership of the valley. It would take time, patience, and careful maneuvering, but it was possible. The process took months. Mateo worked quietly, researching old Spanish land grants, filing claims, navigating bureaucracy that seemed designed to prevent people like me from succeeding. But Esperanza had been thorough, and her trust had been expertly crafted. Slowly, piece by piece, the land became legally mine. During this time, the valley revealed more secrets. I discovered ancient irrigation channels built by indigenous peoples, which I restored to expand my growing area. I found medicinal plants that Esperanza had cultivated, maintaining a pharmacy that required no prescriptions. Most surprisingly, I discovered I wasn't alone in the wilderness. Other women existed on the margins, survivors of different abandonments. Through Joaquin, word spread carefully. Maria Elena, whose husband had gambled away their ranch and disappeared, leaving her with 3 children and nothing else. Susan Walsh, a widow whose late husband's family had seized her property through legal manipulation. Yuki Tanaka, who had fled an abusive marriage with only her daughter and her grandmother's seeds. One by one, they found their way to the valley. Not to stay, we all needed our own spaces, but to connect, to trade, to support each other. We shared knowledge, resources, and most importantly, the understanding that we were not victims, but survivors. The valley became a meeting point, a place of planning and power. My transformation accelerated. The woman who had once needed servants to manage her household now doctored horses, engineered irrigation systems, and negotiated contracts. I learned to read the land like Esperanza had, understanding its moods and messages. The horses remained my partners, but now they were joined by goats for milk, chickens for eggs, and a small herd of cattle that Joaquin helped me acquire. But Thaddeus's shadow still loomed. Through Joaquin's careful intelligence gathering, I learned about his struggles. The oil markets had shifted. His aggressive expansion had overextended his resources. The European ventures had failed spectacularly when Lady Pemberton discovered his true character and withdrew her support. Lawsuits piled up. Assets were frozen. The empire he had built on cruelty began to crumble. More importantly, I learned about Augustus. My son had indeed been sent to Switzerland, but the school reports Joaquin obtained through Matteo's connections painted a troubling picture. Augustus was brilliant but deeply unhappy, writing essays about feeling abandoned and letters to a mother who never responded because they were intercepted. The school counselors expressed concern about his emotional state. This knowledge burned in me like a fever. My son needed me, but I couldn't reach him, not yet. Thaddeus still had legal custody, still controlled the narrative. I needed more than survival. I needed power, real power, the kind that could challenge a man who had once seemed untouchable. That's when Beaumont Rawlings entered my story. An independent oil surveyor with a reputation for both integrity and brilliance. He arrived at the valley following rumors of mineral deposits, tall and weathered, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He reminded me of the land itself, hard but honest. I met him with a rifle, standing at the valley's entrance. "Private property," I said. "Move along." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. "You must be the ghost lady, the one the traders whisper about, building something out of nothing." "In the desert, ghosts don't hold rifles," I replied. "No," he agreed. "They don't mind if I water my horse. I'll pay for the privilege." Something in his manner, respectful without being condescending, made me lower the rifle. That simple interaction began a relationship that would change everything. Beaumont wasn't interested in stealing or exploiting. He was genuinely curious about the geology of the area and impressed by what I'd built. Over several visits, trust grew slowly. He taught me about mineral rights, about the difference between surface and subsurface ownership. He explained how Thaddeus's empire worked, its vulnerabilities and dependencies. Most crucially, he revealed that the land Thaddeus had abandoned me on hadn't been as worthless as assumed. Survey records suggested oil deposits, overlooked because they required newer extraction techniques. You could be sitting on a fortune. Beaumont said one evening as we watched the sunset paint the valley gold, but developing it would take capital, expertise, and the ability to fight off claim jumpers. "I've learned to fight," I said simply. He smiled at that. "I believe you have, but some fights require allies." The alliance that formed wasn't romantic, at least not at first. It was practical, built on mutual respect and complementary skills. Beaumont had knowledge and connections in the oil industry. I had land, silver resources, and a growing network of women who controlled strategic properties across the region. Together, we began planning something audacious. The first step was securing proper surveys and mineral rights documentation. Beaumont worked meticulously, ensuring every claim was ironclad. The second was raising capital. The silver helped, but the real breakthrough came from my network. Maria Elena's land bordered a proposed railway extension. Susan's property controlled water rights crucial for development. Yuki's holdings included rare mineral deposits. Separately, we were vulnerable. Together, we were formidable. We formed the Desert Bloom Collective, a corporation unlike any in Texas, owned and operated by women, focused on sustainable development and mutual support. Beaumont served as our technical advisor, but decisions were made collectively. We started small, developing the easiest resources, reinvesting every penny into expansion and security. The pushback was immediate and vicious. Established oil companies sent lawyers, thugs, and bureaucrats, but we had learned to be thorough. Mateo had assembled a legal team of young, hungry attorneys who saw opportunity in challenging the old guard. Our documentation was impeccable. Our unity was unbreakable. And we had something our opponents didn't expect: the ability to endure hardship they couldn't imagine. The breakthrough came 18 months after I'd found the valley. The first oil well, drilled on the land where Thaddeus had abandoned me, came in strong. Not a gusher, but steady, profitable production. The second well was better. By the third, offers to buy us out started arriving. We refused them all, but with success came danger. Thaddeus, his empire crumbling, learned of Desert Bloom's rise. His rage was volcanic. He filed lawsuits claiming the land was still his, that I'd developed it using community property. He sent investigators to discredit us. He even attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent, claiming the desert had driven me mad. That's when I played my strongest card. Through Mateo's investigation, we had discovered irregularities in how Thaddeus had acquired much of his land. Forged documents, intimidated sellers, bribed officials, evidence that could not only defend against his attacks, but destroy what remained of his empire. The standoff was brutal, conducted in courtrooms and boardrooms, with the future of everything I'd built hanging in the balance. The turning point came from an unexpected source. Malcolm Reeves, the accountant who had first alerted me to Thaddeus's betrayal, reached out through Mateo. Terminated and blacklisted by Thaddeus, Malcolm had spent 2 years documenting financial crimes that went far beyond what I'd known. Tax evasion, money laundering, connections to criminal enterprises. He offered this evidence in exchange for a position with Desert Bloom and protection from Thaddeus's retaliation. Armed with Malcolm's documentation, our legal team went on the offensive. The lawsuits against us collapsed. Criminal investigations into Thaddeus's operations began. His remaining assets were frozen. The empire built on exploitation finally faced justice, but my victory felt hollow without my son. The custody battle was the hardest fight. Thaddeus used every weapon. My poverty after abandonment, my isolation in the desert, even my Mexican heritage. But I had weapons too. The school reports showing Augustus's deterioration, evidence of Thaddeus's criminal activities, testimony from child psychologists about the damage of separating mother and child. Most powerfully, a letter from Augustus himself, smuggled out through a sympathetic teacher, begging to come home. The judge, a stern woman who had seen too many custody battles used as weapons, took 6 months to decide. 6 months of agony, of building my case while building my company, of proving I could provide not just love, but stability and opportunity. When the decision came, granting me full custody with Thaddeus's visitation rights suspended pending criminal proceedings, I collapsed in the courtroom, sobbing with relief. The reunion with Augustus happened at the valley. He was taller, his voice beginning to change, his eyes holding shadows that hadn't been there before. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, strangers who shared blood. Then he whispered, "Mum," and I opened my arms. He crashed into me, and we both cried, years of separation dissolving in tears. "I thought you abandoned me," he said when he could speak. "Dad said you didn't want me anymore." "Never," I said fiercely, "not for 1 second. I fought every day to get back to you." Showing him the valley, introducing him to the horses who had saved my life, explaining how I'd survived and built something from nothing, I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. This wasn't the privileged life he'd known, but it was real, honest, and ours. The transition wasn't easy. Augustus had to adjust from Swiss boarding school to frontier life. But he had my blood, Esperanza's spirit. He learned to ride midnight, to tend gardens, to read the desert's moods. More importantly, he learned what I had, that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from building something worth defending. 5 years passed. Desert Bloom grew from a desperate alliance into a major force in Texas energy. We pioneered sustainable extraction methods, profit sharing with local communities, and investment in renewable alternatives. Our success inspired similar collectives nationwide. The woman who had crawled into a derelict shack to die had become a symbol of resilience and revolution. Beaumont and I married in the valley, surrounded by the women who had become my sisters. In survival, Augustus, now 18 and headed to college to study environmental engineering, stood as my witness. The horses, my first and most faithful allies, grazed peacefully nearby. Esperanza's portrait, painted from descriptions in her journals, watched over us all. But the past wasn't finished with me. On a blazing July afternoon, a familiar Bentley, now dusty and bearing repo notices, crawled up the valley road. Thaddeus emerged, but this wasn't the Titan I'd known. Prison had taken his swagger, poverty his pride. He was thin, grey, a broken man seeking ... what? Forgiveness, mercy, another chance to destroy. I met him at the gate, no longer the abandoned wife, but the owner of an empire built on the ashes of his cruelty. Behind me stood Augustus, Beaumont, and several members of the collective. We weren't a mob, but a family, united in purpose and protection. "Cordelia," he said, his voice a ghost of its former authority. I need help." I studied him, this man who had tried to destroy me, who had stolen my son, who had believed leaving me with 3 horses in the desert was a death sentence. I thought of Esperanza, of her wisdom about wealth and power. I thought of the women who had found strength in shared struggle. I thought of the bitter pleasure revenge might bring. "No," I said simply, "you need consequences." "I have nothing," he pleaded. "They took everything. No one will hire me. I'm living in my car. Please, for Augustus's sake, ... Augustus stepped forward, his voice steady. "Don't use me as a weapon again. You had everything, Dad. Money, power, family. You threw it away for greed. Mum had nothing but 3 horses and her determination. Look what she built. The difference between you isn't circumstances, it's character." Thaddeus flinched as if struck. He looked around the valley, seeing the gardens, the homes, the evidence of thriving life where he'd expected desolation. "How?" he whispered. "By understanding what you never could," I said. "True wealth isn't what you take, it's what you build, what you share, what you leave behind. You tried to break me by stranding me with 3 horses. Instead, you set me free. I could have let him stay, could have shown the mercy he'd denied me. But that would have been another form of cruelty, forcing him to witness daily what he'd lost, what he'd never understood. Instead, I handed him an envelope. Inside was a bus ticket and enough money for a fresh start far from Texas. More than he'd left me, but not much more. "This is your chance," I said, "to discover who you are when everything is stripped away. Maybe you'll find something worth building. Maybe you won't, but you won't do it here, trading on old connections or manipulating new victims. Go, start over, learn what I learned in the desert, that surviving isn't living, and living isn't taking, it's creating." He took the envelope with shaking hands. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd once thought I loved before ambition and arrogance consumed him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. I know," I replied. "But apologies don't rebuild what you burned. Only actions do. Go build something better." As his car disappeared down the dusty road, I felt the last chain of my old life break. I wasn't Thaddeus Blackwood's abandoned wife anymore. I was Cordelia Reyes Rawlings, survivor of the desert, builder of empires, protector of those society discarded. The woman he'd tried to break had become unbreakable. That evening, as the desert painted itself in shades of rose and gold, I stood in the valley Esperanza had hidden, surrounded by the family I'd chosen and the life I'd built. Tempest, now silver with age but still fierce, grazed beside her daughter. Phoenix, scarred but strong, watched over the herd with paternal pride. Midnight, my warrior companion, stood beside Augustus as he practiced guitar, the music floating across the evening air. Beaumont found me there, slipping his arms around me as we watched our son and our legacy. "Any regrets?" he asked. I thought of the woman who had stood in designer heels in a climate-controlled mansion, believing security came from bank accounts and social position. She seemed like a stranger now, or perhaps a character from someone else's story. That woman had died in the desert, and from her remains something stronger had grown. "No," I said, meaning it completely. He thought he was ending my story when he left me with 3 horses. He was actually writing the first chapter. The collective continued to grow, expanding beyond energy into education, healthcare, and sustainable development. We established the Esperanza Foundation, providing resources for abandoned and abused women to rebuild their lives. The valley became a pilgrimage site of sorts, where women came to see proof that rock bottom could become bedrock for building something magnificent. Augustus grew into a man I was proud to call my son, using his privilege and education to fight for environmental justice. He married a brilliant young activist named Sage, and their daughter, Esperanza, was born in the valley under the same stars that had guided me through my darkest nights. When she was old enough to understand, I would tell her the story of her name, of the woman who saved us across centuries, of the legacy written in journals and silver and stubborn survival. On what would have been my 20th wedding anniversary to Thaddeus, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a newspaper clipping. Former oil executive dies in Houston homeless shelter. The article was brief, mentioning only that Thaddeus Blackwood, once one of Texas's wealthiest men, had died alone, estranged from family, his empire long dissolved. There was also a letter written in his shaking hand days before his death. "Cordelia," it read, "I spent 5 years trying to rebuild what I'd lost, only to realize I'd never built anything worth keeping. You were right, surviving isn't living. I survived, but you lived. The 3 horses I left you with, carried you to a life I couldn't imagine. The nothing I reduced you to became everything. I don't ask for forgiveness, only that you know, in the end, I understood. You won. I burned the letter that night, watching the smoke rise into the star-filled sky. There was no satisfaction in his end, no vindication in his suffering. There was only the truth that we all face our wildernesses, and what we become in them is our choice alone. Years flowed like the valley's spring, constant and life-giving. The collective became a model for cooperative development worldwide. Universities sent students to study our methods. Documentaries were made, books were written, but none quite captured the reality of those first desperate days when 3 horses and a dead woman's journals were all that stood between me and oblivion. On my 70th birthday, celebrated in the valley with 3 generations of my chosen family, I stood where I'd first seen Esperanza's hidden paradise. The spring still bubbled, the cottonwoods still whispered secrets, but now paths connected comfortable homes, solar panels caught the desert sun, and children's laughter echoed off canyon walls. Sage approached, leading a young horse, black as midnight with a star on his forehead. Esperanza picked him out herself, she said. She says he reminds her of your stories about the first midnight. I ran weathered hands along the colt's neck, feeling the circle complete itself. Another generation, another horse, another chance to build something from nothing. What will you name him? I asked my granddaughter. She looked up with eyes that held my determination and her father's kindness. Phoenix, she said, because that's what we do, right, Grandma? We rise. Yes, I said, pulling her close. That's exactly what we do. As the sun set on my 7th decade, painting the desert in shades of triumph, I thought about the woman who had stood in a marble mansion, believing she had everything. She'd been wrong. Having everything meant having nothing to fight for, nothing to build, nothing to prove. True wealth came from understanding that when you're left with nothing but 3 horses and your own determination, you possess everything you need to change the world. The desert had been my teacher, Esperanza my guide, and 3 horses my salvation. Together, they had shown me that the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so magnificent from their cruelty that their names are forgotten while your legacy endures. In the end, Thaddeus had been right. About one thing. He had set me free. Free to discover that a woman with nothing to lose and everything to fight for is the most powerful force in any desert. And in leaving me with 3 horses, he had given me the keys to a kingdom he could never have imagined, built not on oil and exploitation, but on solidarity, survival, and the unbreakable bonds between women who refuse to be broken. The stars rose over Esperanza's valley, now my valley, now our valley, shining on an empire built from abandonment, watered with tears, and grown strong through shared struggle. Somewhere in Switzerland, a school held records of a boy who'd once been torn from his mother. Somewhere in Houston, a man lay in an unmarked grave, his empire dust. But here in the Texas desert, 3 horses grazed peacefully, a spring bubbled eternally, and the daughters of survivors gathered to write the next chapter of a story that began with intended cruelty and transformed into unexpected triumph. They thought they could break us. They were wrong. We were not broken. We were tempered, like steel in fire, made stronger by every attempt to destroy us. And in the end, we didn't just survive, we thrived.